Good morning, everyone. From the Bay of Fundy to Thunder Bay and from Bemidji back to Poughkeepsie, this is Free Atlantic Radio. I am your host, Tom Kaczynski, the voice of the Northeast Nation coming into being. Glad you could be with us today. Today's date is Friday, July 17th, 2020, and today's show, we're going to begin what will be probably a 3, but potentially a 4-part series that begins to ask, why are we seeing these riots in the streets? And at this point, I think most people understand that they are riots, and I'm going to go into, in today's episode, the question of who are the people who are out there, and then next Friday, we'll talk about who's backing them. And then the succeeding Friday, we'll go into the deeper causes that's really motivating this. And it's a deep question because there's a lot of different groups working together that have different and often contradictory impulses. So I think that will make a good show, and that will be the subject of the monologue. Before we get to that, I want to thank everyone who's been listening to our program. The information is up at free-atlantic-radio.castos.com, and I also want to encourage you to check out our sister station at free-atlantic-voices.castos.com, where we will have recurring episodes on Tuesdays and Thursdays when I'm off by the excellent Kanaz Filan, where he's going to be talking about some of the questions of the spiritual awakening. And then on Thursday, where John Q. Publius is going to be going out there and letting you know who's responsible for things out there. 2 excellent gentlemen, 2 great broadcasts. We'll put a link in the show notes for today so you have a chance to listen to them. The other good news I have is, in the course of doing this project, the Atlantic Nation that we imagine is a repudiation of those things that America will not do or does not do right. And as such, since we're sort of ahead of the game on this, we found we have a lot of friends out there. And this is a movement that started in and has been rooted in New England and its values. But as we've gone out and talked to people, that's how we ended up in upstate New York with some of our friends up there, as well as Pennsylvania. And as we think about what the larger Atlantic means, we consider that we have coherent economic regions that work together based upon common heritage, common history, common economy, common utility. And those who look at a map can realize pretty quickly the Great Lakes dump into the Atlantic Ocean, and I've had a lot of requests from people wanting us to go in there. I've had a number of people who've requested, and we welcome anyone who does so at newalbion@protonmail.com, who wanted to fly the Pines and Lines, our flag, which if you haven't seen is a sight to behold. So we definitely have some of those we can work out. I've been sending them out for $20 a piece, which is pretty cheap. But if for the people up there in Canada who have been listening to us, we want to say thank you. And as a result of this, what we have made the decision to do is to begin to integrate our efforts with our brothers and sisters throughout the greater northeastern nation of this continent, knowing that that is a key to our survival. So to the good people of the Dominion of Ontario, as well as the states of Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Minnesota, I want to say welcome to the Atlantic Nation. Even though you're Midwesterners, we understand the values that you want are the values that America used to express, and you need to begin realizing that world has collapsed, and now we will begin to draw together, as we did once again, on the common values that originally motivated us, whether it was the settlers from Connecticut that moved into Ohio, or, the other people from Pennsylvania who moved westward from there, that we are going to go ahead and try to renew our bonds of friendship, much like Aragorn did. And we're going to begin working in there with an invitation as we go forward to our brothers and sisters in Kentucky, West Virginia, and Virginia, who also may wish to be involved. And of course, never forgetting our Les Frères du Québec. So that is an ongoing thing, and we'll talk much more about that in subsequent episodes, what we're doing on the ground, what we're doing to make this real, because there's a lot involved with it, and time is limited. We literally are dealing with a time where a sociopathic elite has taken charge of our society and are trying to destroy all of our people. And therefore, people will need to be able to work together on a broad basis so that we can come together, and then when it's all done, we can go ahead and part amicably as brothers, as makes sense, or unite in new conjunctions. And as we look at this, I would say with some confidence that our friends in the South are beginning to work together, and our friends out west are doing so. And here in the Northeast, we are providing a leadership role in putting together the questions of how we want to deal with the future. So that's something to look forward to as we go into the future. And we need to work quickly. Just this week, I'm sure all of you saw the many terrible situations. The 24-year-old who was killed for saying all lives matter. The many churches and altars to Christ that have been burnt down. The violence that continues in the streets, especially up in Portland, Oregon, as it always seems to up there, and the complete absence, as per usual, of our government of doing anything to protect people and their decent rights that they have. And because of that, that's what really prompted what today's episode is, in which we're going to look very closely at what Antifa actually believes. But we start with a question of who is it that we're really facing? And the first part of it is who's in the streets. So a lot of times what you find when you really study events is there's a pretext and a reality. The pretext is the murder of George Floyd by an inappropriate Minneapolis law enforcement officer, Derek Chauvin. And that is being fully prosecuted, and it was within 1 or 2 days, but it was an opportunity that was taken as a pretext by radical groups who want nothing more than to not just destabilize society. They want to build a totalitarian utopia to change human nature to fit their vision of what you should be. And whatever your vision is, ranging from progressive to liberal to conservative to regressive, ultimately, in the end, if you don't agree with them, you will end up being meat for the grinder. And we know this because this happened in every totalitarian regime that has ever been enacted to accomplish utopia. Right-wing or left-wing, incidentally. But especially when you look at butchers like Stalin, who, for whatever reason, never gets mentioned in the same breath with other names, but was responsible for 20 million lives killed. And he literally would go out there and he would seek to find people who would be killed just to keep them in line so they wouldn't ask questions. This is the ideology that we see in the streets. And to be clear, I understand that a big part of it is ignorant kids who never learned anything better than what they were taught in colleges. And I guess that's a good place to start the story. We operate from this assumption that when people are out there in the streets and they're going ahead speaking to what their nominal values are, that they are nothing more than a conduit for the values they express. And their idea is that they want justice. And justice is a very good idea. I agree with it. But justice means equal treatment under the law and a set of codes that are followed by everyone. That justice is being served already for George Floyd. But the argument is, no, it's not, because this group is this way and this group's another way. And so the divide and conquer game is a very old one, but the power of dialectical thinking. That is to say, you have a thesis, an idea. You present an antithesis, which is a different idea, and you use the changing idea to pull someone in your direction, create a synthesis, is the heart of Marxist ideology. It comes from a guy called Hegel, who actually presented this in a more neutral sense, but Marx postulated there were economic laws that were designed in the end to reconcile these syntheses together in such a way that we would live in a society where there would be no contradictions. Literally, that's why the fundamental ideology of socialism has always been and never been of Marxism, that we will all be the same, we will all be equal. But if you could imagine a future in which all people were actually equal, and I don't mean equal in terms of law, and I don't mean equal in terms of liberty, I mean equal in terms of outcomes, what you would have to do is you would have to basically constrain humanity to a narrow vision of what could be accomplished so that you would have the opportunity to have that level of equality. And this is why every single communist regime that has ever been tried in history has ultimately bludgeoned its own people, because human nature is the part that misses. And as you know, here in the Atlantic nation, looking at nature, as much as these people who live in cities their whole lives and their idea of a nature walk is going to a park once a year, think they understand it, doesn't work like that. Nature is about the flow of time and the belonging to a certain area, and reason is learning to live within that sustainably and with good stewardship, which are values we very much support. But for those who actually genuinely believe them, as I know many of our people do up here, that communism is the opposite of that. I mean, consider the 5-year plans that were enacted in Russia and how much damage they did in terms of environmental degradation, destruction of farmland, not to mention the loss of millions of lives. And yet we see this ideology continue to proliferate because it is the ideology that's taught in the colleges. And what happens in the most cynical American conjunction of the system is parents spend tens of thousands, or even in some cases now hundreds of thousands of dollars, to send their children to universities thinking this is what's required for them to go ahead and be successful in life, or to be fulfilled, or to reach a higher status, and they come back hating everything in their society. And the surrender of the culture war that was undertaken by the right is one of the saddest stories of American history. And my goal is not to necessarily promote right-wing values over left-wing values, but rather to recognize that there's an equilibrium that's been destroyed. And there was a time when people spoke up for the idea of morality and responsibility and this idea against collective guilt, but now we don't see that anymore. And because we don't see that, and because the people who are in charge of the universities have found a way to silence their opposition by removing them first from positions of authority and then using their control of different boards to basically indoctrinate people at pay, so they're actually getting paid by the people they're indoctrinating, that literally they have become a one-size party in this. And this is what you see replicated on Twitter and throughout social media, where the cancel culture generation goes from venture capital in Silicon Valley to the publishing houses like New York Times and whatnot, to the colleges themselves, where kids are only taught one thing and not having experience of the real world, or being completely shut off from nature, living in our technological bubbles as we do, and we don't realize the insanity of the values that are being promoted. And so what does that mean? It means you have a lot of well-intentioned, very poorly educated kids who end up being would-be rioters out in the streets because they think they're doing the moral act. They believe they're seeking justice just as much as Robespierre did in the French Revolution. However, the only justice that ends up coming to this is the justice of the mob, which is to destroy all that it doesn't like. And whether you look at the chop shop that was set up in Seattle or all the various different entities that are being put forward, you see that there's nothing but a destructive nature that can come from this. And what I would say to that is the ignorant and the foolish. You can reach those people. But behind them, there's a deeper cadre of people who are the voices of this revolution, who are really using this as a cover for the destruction that they're trying to enact on a system, knowing that the only way people would ever subscribe to their cynical rules for order is if they had no ability to defend themselves, no society that stood up for them, and no alternative. They have been very clever. They have had a lot of lawyers over the years have destroyed the ability to have an opposition to them in enacting repressive tolerance. And we'll talk about that near the end of the show as our bad word of the day, because you deserve to know what Marcuse said about that. And you'll find it disgusting if you have any respect for free speech and actual tolerance, because what they did was they reversed the whole thing, saying that you can only have free speech if you speak the things that we know to be true. So, like any religion, and this is the religion of secular humanism, their dogma was to silence all dissent. And that's why when we stand against them, when I mentioned very proudly that we are, heavily scripted by Christian views, the reason we do that is because you need to understand that these people are utterly amoral. They want to have equality at all costs, and they don't care how many of you they need to mow through. But I'm not asking you to believe me about that. What I want to do in this episode, and I'm going to take a little less time for monologue and a little more time for reading, is we're going to go ahead and read Antifa in their own words. Now, this piece originally comes from, as I understand it, but I've seen it in multiple places. This was a manual that Antifa was distributing at Evergreen State College. They continue to distribute it to this day. And this is their operations manual for what they believe. And there are different versions of it you can find out there. It doesn't really matter which one I use, because fundamentally this fits what they believe. It fits Marxism. It fits their actions. And you need to understand this. And I want you to understand what this is, because Antifa as an organization is a front for well-funded people who basically are arguing to enact a Bolshevik revolution. And what was that? In the Soviet Union, there was a small radical group that took control of the cities that was able to use that to develop a force to go ahead and take over the whole of the Russian Empire. And as they did that, they destroyed anyone who stood against them. They killed the Tsar and his family. If you've ever seen the movie Anastasia, that's what that's about. And that all of these efforts were undertaken as a means to realize a utopian society where they would go ahead and destroy the old ways and build a new way of progress. They always like the word progress, in accordance with Marx's idea of economic law, where you would destroy all contradictions and say everything is acceptable except things that question this. And so I want you to see what they end up supporting, because this is what your kids at college are getting educated, and this is the indoctrination which has to be undone. So this is the Antifa manual, and it says on the top of it, and I will share the archive of it because I got a copy of this here, do not distribute to any CIS white males, okay, so that means heterosexual white males, okay, non-POC, non-LGBTQ, peoples, or fascists, okay? So this is their thing. Introduction, and I'm just going to read to you in their own words, but I will tell you where I offer commentary. In fact, I'll read a whole section before I comment on it, so you can hear them in their words. I want you to understand what you're facing, not the media says you're facing, not what Tom Kaczynski says you're facing, what you are actually facing. If you are reading this, it's because someone close to our movement trusted you with it. Please do not distribute to anyone who may attempt to harm or denigrate what we are doing. This is an anti-fascist or Antifa manual. If you are reading this, you already know we are a social justice movement against hatred, intolerance, and bigotry. This manual outlines where we've been, where we're at, and where we're headed within the next 100 years. But first, to understand how we got here, we have to understand, okay, this is the first section, white privilege. For hundreds, if not thousands of years, the CIS white male power structure controlled the media and disbursement of information. First came the printing press, controlled by white males. Then came mass media, such as newspapers and television, controlled by white males. But the next evolution of media was born in a time when the CIS white male power structure began to lose its firm grip on the dissemination of ideas. Some of our kind have begun to infiltrate the high-level positions of power in major media organizations. And of course, the new king of idea dissemination is social media. This is the new battleground for our war against fascism. Whites, especially CIS white males, have proven to be the greatest evil mankind has ever known. From Hitler to our very own Truman, who dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, to the slave traders of old, no one has proven to do more harm to mankind than white men. From their murderous plundering of the Native Americans and African slaves, white males have achieved status and power in the United States and Western Europe. Never indulge any fantasy by the fascists that white men have also cured diseases, lifted people out of poverty through Western capitalism or democracy, or any other facetious claim they may make about such men. Their gains were only achieved through rape and plunder. Hence, CIS white males have inherent privilege in our society. This is the basis on which people of color, LGBTQ, the disabled, and other groups that need protection will level the playing field and form a new world order, that is to say, one world government. A government by protected classes of people, for protected classes of people, for the protection and betterment of all of humanity. Okay, so let's go through that. If you want to know where the origin of the anti-white agenda is, that's where it is. We are, quote, the greatest evil mankind has ever known. And I think the irony of this is, they attack mass media as being owned by white guys. If you actually study who owns media and you listen to media, is the media nice to white people at all? No, it isn't, because it's not really run by white people. It's run overwhelmingly by people, I hate to say it, of Jewish extraction. And they have their own complicated identity. I don't even want to go there. Others have. But what I want to say to you is that their argument that there is nothing good whites have ever done, and we are being set up for being the greatest evil, is a Manichaean view of the universe, where we are bad, so they are never going to tolerate us, they are never going to like us. And this is not about justice, this is about oppression. And for the majority who live in our area, throughout the United States, who is still, of European extraction, white men and women alike, you've seen the Karen meme attacking our women, that we are now being targeted. And if you are a non-white who lives in this society, then you are being targeted as well to go ahead and be used as a weapon. And if you want to see that be used to destroy all that you cared about in this country, then you can align with these people. But what they're actually saying is, we never did anything good, and don't even believe it for a second. We are going to take the power. We are going to silence those who stand against us. And this was one of the things they said, that every one of our accomplishments was built only through rape and plunder. So when you see things like the 1619 Project in the New York Times, all of these erasures of history, the tearing down of statues, are because they have to remove the story of what our people actually did, white and non-white alike, so they can tell the story they want to tell in their books, in their classrooms, which we've given over to them, saying that, hey, all those people didn't do things, they robbed you, and then these are going to be the new people who are oppressed. And why do they oppress white people specifically? Because white people have a majority and theoretically have power. So what they look for is angry groups, and you can see this. Let me use an example. Despite the fact the vast majority of LGBTQ people being white, because most people are white, they include them as a separate group. Why? Because they're playing games with identity. And this is what they always do. In the 1930s, it used to be white working class against the rich mercantile class. And so what they do is they always pick a group who's angry. Now, if you look at it today, they play trannies against lesbians. They're here for sexist intimidation of gender roles. Why? They want to break all bonds of nature and friendship. This is what they do. Why do they do it? They want to, quote, continuing their thing, creating a culture of tolerance. To create a culture of tolerance, we must first eliminate all forms of hate speech. Every idea critical of our movement and our way of thinking must be condemned as racist, homophobic, misogynist, etc. We have facts and history on our side. When all else fails, compare someone to Hitler. Every once in a while, one of our minority group friends will become disillusioned and speak out as a conservative, also known as a fascist. Belittle them as delusional. They speak against their own rational self-interest. Our color, my blackness, for example, comes first. It defines who I am. I am black first, American second, gay lesbian first, little person dwarf second, American third, and so on. So what you see, I want to say this, is that you are only an identity. You are a group. You have no individual right. And they call themselves this. If you look at what they practice, they are a hive. They are a collective. They seek to make humanity into an unthinking machine. And they don't know they're doing this because they think, oh, we're just trying to be nice. But what happens is people get brainwashed and it becomes addictive to go forward with these things. But anyone who disagrees with them is a Nazi. They've been doing this for years, and I will show you by the end of it. This ideology is not new. This is over 50 years old, and it comes out of a very cynical way of looking at the world. So, crashing the borders. Most liberals are not Antifa yet, but they soon will be. Refugee crises, such as those created by the situation in Syria, are the ideal way to get more people of color into America. They need our help. There are pictures of dead babies who have washed ashore onto pieces. Use imagery such as this to get support for expanding the POC minority population in the United States. Never call any immigrant illegal, obviously. They are undocumented. It doesn't matter whether they came over here to smuggle drugs or if they were brought here by their parents at a young age. Migrants from Mexico and South America will play a crucial role in Antifa activities in the next 100 years. By 2117, 100 years from now, our goal is to have 70% of the U.S. population be non-white. By then, we will hopefully have subverted the power structure enough to eventuate our ends. So, what are they doing? They're saying they want anyone here, criminal, angry, otherwise, any means. They don't believe in laws. They don't believe in any loyalty to this country. They don't believe in any loyalty to the people who are here. They have no nation. They just have an idea, which is that they're going to bring in more of the other to destroy that which they don't like, which ultimately, when you look at the fact that most of these people are white progressive college kids, is themselves, and they're taught to hate themselves. This is Stockholm Syndrome, literally, where you see people in the camps, and that is the universities at this point, attacking their own. But I want you to understand this, that what they do is they put out a story where they play on your feelings instead of logic and saying, okay, people who live in a certain area can work together to build a better nation. That's what we do with the Atlantic Nation. And that's why I'm presented as a Nazi in the media, because I say, hey, let's take care of our own people, the people who are actually here, white, blue, brown, whatever. It doesn't matter. Let's work at that and let's actually build something instead of trying to constantly disrupt it. They're like, no, you need to admit the other. And if I were to say something was good, if I was to say Columbus did a good thing coming to New York, no, he didn't. They raped all the people. They will never allow you an opportunity. They don't want peace. They don't want to agree. They say no peace, no justice. They're not saying that if you give them justice or if you give them peace, they'll give you justice. They're saying they're not going to give it to you. They don't want to because they're indoctrinated. And their leadership knows this because they're looking to spawn fights and they're looking to change who this country is and what it is in a way where there's no ability to come together. They're going to tell you what they want, but when we talk about what we're doing in the Atlantic Nation, the American nation has no guts to stand up to this because the money structure is backing this for reasons of their own that we'll get into next week, and that the opposition, the conservative Republicans, don't care. They just want to go ahead and get elected. You see it over and over again. Trump has proven a toothless tiger, and with the Democrats, they are enabling this. And then you have to ask if you want to go into a violent Bolshevik revolution, where I will tell you, anyone who speaks out too loudly against what they are will be attacked. Let's go back to what they say, just to be very clear. As they said in the culture of tolerance, if one who is a person of color speaks out against them, they will be worse against them than they are against white people. Why? Because they're disrupting the narrative, and all of this is about the narrative. This is how they control the media. Let's continue. It's important to gain control of the media through any means necessary. In these early stages of this movement, it's important not to alienate any CIS white males who are on our side. Use white shame and white guilt to kowtow men in positions of power into following our ideals. Some major media conglomerates are swinging to our side, but they have not gone far enough. I do want to say, I think this came out in 2017 originally, so let me say that. That's what I read anyway. Social media is the new battlefront of ideals. We've seen what kind of power these outlets yield by kicking major fascists off their platform before. This will and this must only continue. And remember, they define fascism themselves as anyone who's right of center, and we'll go into it. It's even worse than that if you read their intellectual thinkers, not this, claptrap. If you are seeking positions of power in the media, be sure to obfuscate and hide your true intentions on the various social media platforms. Better to remain a mystery and wield massive power than blatantly shouting your viewpoints from the hilltops. We have objective truth on our side. Always project this. Use social media as a baton to slap down anyone who holds fascist viewpoints. Call them racist, homophobic, misogynistic. Create an echo chamber around you. Many of us first learned about Antifa and gained our views on college campuses and universities across the country. This needs to start earlier. Take up teaching as a profession. Educate the youth about the dangers of fascism. Befriend those vulnerable students who you suspect of having fascist-leaning parents. Teach little Timmy not just how to read good, but how to think and act good. Once we firmly have control over social media, which they mostly do at most major media platforms, it's time to start Operation Truth. The way many social media platforms currently work is that people are primarily exposed to viewpoints they primarily already agree with. This creates a kind of echo chamber for that individual. However, once we control the flow of information, we can slowly start spreading the truth to the fascists who reject our ideology. This must be done very carefully, slowly at first. Begin suggesting a piece of news, video, tweet, or post that the opposition could conceivably believe in. Create new outlets of media that do not come with the baggage of known bias. Convert major new media stars into witting or unwitting pawns for our cause. So, have you not seen this over Twitter, over Facebook, where certain voices get shut down, they get shadow banned, they get silenced? This is why you're having to listen to this on a dissident network, because this is what these people are doing, and they say they don't have the power. I mean, turn on any media station. This is literally what's pushed out there, to the point where people who are literally being burned in the streets and churches burning isn't even covered. But at the same time, if one person gets called a name, it will be a national news story, a hate crime. The ADL calls the FBI, and they go out and cover it. And I know I have an educated audience. You guys can't let this continue to happen. And we saw in the midst of a pandemic, when people were dying by the tens of thousands or more, that what did they do? They decided having a protest like this was more important. And the whole society gave way to them because they feared the power they could put out there. We are an edifice that is broken, that does not have the ability to stand against us unless we speak to a truth of our own. And that's what we do here in the Atlantic Nation. We make it very clear that we stand up for the values of truth, of reason, of nature, of grace, of loyalty, And truth comes from the balancing of those items together and nothing else. Believe the way we do or you will be fired. The next crucial step is to threaten the livelihoods of anyone who dares speak out against our agenda. They are, after all, fascists who are clearly racist, homophobic, or misogynistic. You can't run a company with someone like that in your midst. Once we achieve this end, we'll be able to taste our victory, yet we have so much further to go to achieve our ends. Fearing for one's livelihood is a big motivator. CIS white male fascists will begin to hide in the shadows. They may lurk online on message boards and underground media, but will be afraid to speak up using their own name and voice for fear of being labeled a bigot. Many fascist corporate overlords still exist and will offer some of these hate mongers a place to work. But it's only a matter of time before our ranks infiltrate even the most evil of corporations who tolerate such hate speech from their employees. They are looking to destroy you. I know. They tried to have my wife killed. They wanted her to be denied access to medical care she had just because of my political views. This is the reality of what these people who say they want justice in the streets are actually enabling. And I know most kids don't understand this to this full depth, but a lot of them do. And don't assume that people don't understand the consequences of their actions. And we are coming into an age of responsibility where that needs to be considered. And remember, their definition of fascism is just anyone who disagrees with them. If you're a run-of-the-mill conservative person, or even a moderate who's not political, you are a threat to them if you uphold societal norms. You go to church on Sunday, well, you hate the state having dominion over this, and you believe in the bigotry of the Bible. I could go forward. You could be a Latino and believe that. You could be a Hispanic white supremacist. And you'll notice the Orwellian way in which they employ language. But what do? They get everyone destroyed. And how many people have been fired? How many people have lost their jobs? How many people are being fired just for being related to someone? This is the people who are pushing this. And they've been in the HR departments, and they've come out of the universities, and they get the lawyers, and they get the judges. Like that prosecutor in St. Louis, who's literally prosecuting someone for using their Second Amendment rights. This is what they're at. All right, so let's continue. But it gets worse. This is where we're at right now. But I want you to see where they want to go. So in their own words, okay, phase 2, the socialization of capital. Never reveal our end game, but the obvious next step once we control the media is the socialization of capital. This will obviously require major political power. With hopefully 70% of people of color in this nation, we may begin to have a chance at these ends. Let me just interject one thing. Joe Biden has promised to legalize, to put a pathway to citizenship for all the illegals in America. There's already 10 to 20 million people, maybe more in this country, who have that status. Without imputing them in any way, shape, or form, if they're basically given money and a vote to do certain things, what will they do, especially when these people say they're going to have open borders? There's your 30, 40, 50 million people. That is how they're going to change everything. And anyone who's been researching this for 5 minutes knows it. Obviously, we start with healthcare. It's after all, a basic human right. Everyone knows someone who died of cancer who got sick somehow. Obamacare was better than what we had before, but it was built with the healthcare lobbyist consent. We need single payer, and we need it now. Americans have come to accept that it's okay for them to be locked in a cage rather than not pay their taxes. Never mind that the money collected goes to the military-industrial complex and to engage in imperialism abroad. Wars against brown people who happen to live above oil-rich lands. As people of color, LGBTQ, little people, the disabled, Muslims, and other minority classes slowly become the majority. And I want you, 1 second here, I want to interject this. Muslims are the biggest religion in the world. They're not a minority, they're just a minority in this country. And you'll notice that there are values not for white people specifically, I want to say, where you can adopt that makes you a non-white person. Why? Because what they do is they play this game. They change the rules of the game constantly because all they're seeking is destruction. We will naturally vote pro-Antifa politicians into office. It is, after all, only in our best interest. After healthcare, the next target for socialization will obviously be the media. Use one of the government's only tools against big corporations, antitrust, anti-monopoly laws, to split the media into worker-owned, Antifa-controlled entities. Currently, only the rich and upper middle class get to enjoy the benefits of Wall Street and all it has to offer. If the workers owned and controlled their own businesses, everyone would win except the big fat cat CEOs would have a job. We will gradually have to raise the tax rates on both the 1% as well as the mid to upper middle classes to achieve our ends. Raise the minimum wage to a livable wage, especially in places like San Francisco, Los Angeles, and New York. Build homes for the homeless and confiscate foreclosed properties from banks to give to the homeless. After media, banks and finance will be our next target, followed by technology and manufacturing. One thing we must be sure of is to never let the white man excuse himself of his obligations to us by talking so-called reparations. That time is surely past, and we give the CIS white male power structure an excuse to stop caving to our demands. Oh, we gave Jamal $100,000 in reparations 2 years ago. We don't need to help him now that he's a penniless crack addict on the street, they will surely say. So they don't want money. I want you to be very clear. So when they say it's about money or settlement, don't give them a settlement. They want power. This is it. And you know, it's funny. Why are the corporations enabling them? One, they don't want to have to deal with the social media storm of Twitter because they're caught up in the front end of it. And the other reason is a lot of the people who've gotten in there actually believe this trash. All right. But the third point is because there are some really cynical people who understand that by making these people out themselves, that they literally are going to cause a massive argument against them that is going to lead potentially to their destruction. We'll talk about that next week on Friday, because you have to understand people who have a lot of power are not as stupid as the people who go out and vote on average and are just sitting around and living their lives. But they understand these power relationships, and this is a way of flushing people out by letting them appear they have the appearance of power. And there are far more cynical people than Antifa, delusional utopians. Nonetheless, a lot of the people at the top of these movements, especially with your Antifa, your communist fronts, all these things, do understand that problem, and they're pushing around those edges, and the option of seeing a fight between the Bolsheviks and the neoliberal elites is a very real possibility, especially as we see the economies begin to have a lot of problems, as the ongoing pandemic, the shutdowns by the governors are going to lead to people losing their house, losing their jobs, having difficulty in being fed in a lot of ways, and because of that, you might see these fights being picked. And as we watch as a third party, just trying to take care of our people in areas and trying to build a better system, remember that these are the other forces with which we must contend. All right, speeding up progress. To achieve these ends, there are some tactics we must use to speed our way. It's well known that whites in America are not producing as many offspring as their counterparts. It's important to make abortion on demand and without apology overwhelmingly available in predominantly white communities. We must lower the lower the bar to access birth control in these communities, and use media to promulgate the image of childless white people as being sexy, hip, and cool. Meanwhile, the fascists on the right will continue to attempt to restrict access to abortions on demand. So I just want you to understand this. Literally, they're saying that if you're trying to protect children from being murdered, you're a fascist. Does that fit with you guys? They want you dead. They're saying it. Middle-class whites tend to have the ability to pay, even for out-of-state travel, to get their fetuses aborted. Currently, predominantly people of color dominated poor communities have little choice but to keep a baby to term. Even if they get sent into the foster system, these children will one day lay the groundwork for our eventual New World Order and one world government. You know, the Bible says in Genesis 1, be fruitful and multiply, right? Or it wasn't Genesis 1, it's Genesis 2. Anyway, or 6, rather. It's early in the morning. But my point is that they're saying that we want to argue for white genocide. So you saw people get attacked over and over again. This is terrible. You can't say that. They say it. They want it. And what do? They set women against men, and they use their media influence to convince women that it's more important for you to make money and to go into the system and serve our purposes than to go ahead and have children. Why? Because they want to unmake everything. These are their own words. I don't have to tell you. I couldn't write this stuff if I tried. But let's continue. So, Phase 3, New World Order. You heard that phrase before, going back to George Bush, right? Imagine a world free of hatred and bigotry. Imagine a world where you'll never have to be called the N-word again. Imagine a world where you can be as gay as you want and not be called a raging, dick-sucking faggot. Where Antifa ideas reign supreme and all hateful, microaggressive speech is eradicated. One way to accomplish this will be to tag or microchip every human being on the planet, and they will do so voluntarily. Use this disguise of entertainment and other benefits to lure the people to the Antifa-approved regulators to monitor the citizenry of the world. Information accessible by waving a wand a few feet away from the chip would be DNA content, including percentage of colors, genetic disadvantages, political leanings scored by past social media, earnings, known associates, Antifa status, etc. We must ensure that only Antifa-approved regulators can access this data, lest we veer too far into fascism ourselves. Let me continue there. We got a vaccine coming out. Operation Warp Speed, nanotech included. This is coming, and people, for fear of being sick, are going to agree to it. For what I know, it may be very possible, and I've heard actually considerable evidence. This is from the guy who ran Coronavirus Central, suggesting that nanotech's already embedded in this virus, and that's why it behaves so strangely. We'll need more evidence to prove it, but it may be possible. What are they saying? That as we go forward into the chipped future, you will be monitored like a machine, like they do in China. Social credit score. You can see all this. And where anyone who says anything they don't agree with ends up in a camp. You could end up like the Uyghurs did in China, where basically they're harvested for their organs. You can look this up. The pictures are out there. Disturbing, but this is how they see you if you don't go forward, if you don't believe in their agenda. This, with a wave of a wand, one would be able to tell whether that vaguely beigeish person is allowed to use the term, quote, nigga. For example, in rap lexicon, it's popular to say, where my niggas at? I got hoes in different area codes. While clearly misogynistic, a person of color has the right to use the term nigga. Antifa regulators will have to determine an acceptable percentage threshold of color in one's DNA that makes it acceptable to use the term nigga. If you were only 17% of African descent, perhaps it is not okay to use that term. And just to be very clear, I'm just reading this verbatim, so if you're offended, blame Antifa. Clearly, if you are 1% or less of African descent, it is problematic, although some dark Asians can get away with it, saying it just because of how dark their skin tone is. However, if someone of, say, 80% Caucasian descent attempts to use the N-word with the hard R, they will clearly be in violation of hate crime speech. While prison would clearly be too harsh punishment for such an individual, demotion of status, power, and income would not be out of the question and should be the norm. So what they want to do is regulate your thinking, just so you understand this. This is really what they're trying to accomplish. They're trying to say that if you don't think what we want and say that that which is darker is better, which is what they come down to, and they're just doing that as a control mechanism. I guarantee you the fascist elite will change this, because Mao did that. At first, the cadres were in charge, and then they were corrupt, so their kids were turned against them. The idea of perpetual revolution being the necessity of Marxist ideology, where anytime there's a conflict, you go ahead and support the revolting force. This is one of the questions you have to look at. But what they're saying is, literally, if you go ahead and say words, you don't have free speech, you don't have free thought, you are regulated in your very action, and that you are so succumbed to fear that that's the only thing that can constrain you, and that everything you work for can be stolen from you in a minute. This world is already here. Do you want to believe in that? Do you think we can advance knowledge when a few people decide for us all what is truth? I don't. This is why I'm going to fight it. I hope you do the same. The issue of using force to achieve our ends is a tricky one. Always shout down fascist opponents, disrupt their speeches, counter-rally their rallies, force the media to show our side as the righteous one. When it comes to the issue of terror, we do not condone mass murder. However, a tiny majority of people who happen to be Muslim decided to blow themselves up for their cause. Clearly, this is the result of hundreds of years of Western intervention by CIS white males on their culture. Osama bin Laden would not have attacked the World Trade Center and Pentagon had we not dropped atom bombs on Japan in World War II, for example. Palestinians are clearly victims and have little to no choice than to avenge their relatives' deaths at the hands of the Israeli government. Make no mistake, Jews are a protected class of people, but we do not condone Israeli aggression against Palestinians. And I'm going to tell you one thing here, that Jewish fight against this group is going to be at the heart of what's going forward here, because they've created a monster. And that's just the reality of it. But let's just go back to what they said. They literally blamed the bombing of 9/11, saying it was justified by Osama bin Laden because of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Don't you almost wish some of these people would have ended up on a Japanese death camp, maybe on the march to Corregidor or the Bataan Death March? I mean, honestly, it's so insane, their stupidity. And to be honest with you, the reason why we got in Osama bin Laden, the bin Laden school is at Oxford University. You want to know where these ideas come from? It doesn't come from them. It comes from the West. We create our own monsters over and over again, and it comes back to this broken, cynical university system. It's part of the New World Order, and these people are supporting it. So what is their endgame? Phase 4, one world government. Our movement will eventually spread to other nations. Indeed, it has already begun. Some peoples will prove excessively resistant to our brand of Antifa, such as those who were previously burned by communism or failed socialist states. Make no mistake, we will prevail where others have failed. Their leaders' lust for status, power, and wealth eventually led them to create layers of power full of corrupt state officials. Antifa have the power of the people on our side, and we will eventually, and we will not succumb to such a fate. It is only natural that the ideologies we espouse spread throughout the globe. Starving Africans will finally be lifted out of poverty when we redistribute the wealth of the Western 1% to them, and to our brothers and sisters here at home. Container ship after container ship will be converted to massive passenger cruise liners, and will ferry poverty-stricken brown people from around the world to the former United States and Western Europe. Jobs will flower aplenty at all the world's worker-owned businesses. Those who can't work will be provided a stipend and provided an unlimited supply of opiates, marijuana, meth, and cocaine to occupy their free time. Sounds too good to be true? It isn't. This is what we're fighting for. This is what we believe. We are Antifa. Either you are with us or you are a fascist. So how many people have been called a fascist or a Nazi in the media these days? They want to go ahead and, people who... They don't care about the success of people. They have anyone who's here who doesn't fit in, who fits their identity, they'll drug them into oblivion. anyone who's here who tries to stand up for excellence, they'll either beat, refuse, or kill. They don't want to say it here, but that's it. And literally, they want to bring in just truckloads of people just to take what you have. And whether you're white, brown, black, or yellow, it doesn't matter. That's all they want to do. This is theft on a massive scale. And look, I think that there's an idea there that people can understand on some level. A lot of times when you have really terrible ideologies, you have a good idea taken to an insane extreme. Having a ground level on which everyone can survive is an okay thing. It's some of the things we support here in the Atlantic nation. I like the idea of a new Homestead Act, of a chance for people to get ground and property and own something for themselves. But there's no loyalty to any people. There's no loyalty even to their own people. They literally say they're going to give an unlimited supply of drugs to keep them just quiet. Where's that? How's that going to go good? And there's no reason, because basically groups are just going ahead, and it's hate thing set up to say that some groups are good and some groups are bad. And if you're white or you're Christian or you're male or you're hetero or any of these things, you're bad. And they'll go further than this. That's why they make new genders, because they have to eventually have everyone be bad because they want to be the ultimate good. And when you resist them, they have to believe by their own unfalsifiable faith that you're bad. This is Antifa. They're not anti-fascists. I don't want to use that phrase, they are the real fascists. They're worse than that. They're red guards. They're communists. They're Bolsheviks. They're insane. They're evil. It's a word they don't like. We need to use to learn words that they don't like. The same way they use words we don't like. And I will tell you what I am going to do. Every time I see one of these people, I'm going to label them what they are: evil. What is evil? That which is focused on destruction and seeks no good in anything. So you want to know what is evil? This is evil. It is chaos. It is discord. It is anger. It is prejudice. It is hate. And the whole thing reeks of hate. That they literally say we are the forces of love and tolerance, but they're not. They're the exact opposite of it. But this isn't anything new. Let's go forward here. Let me give you a bad word. We'll give you a couple bad words. We'll go a little longer on this one than I usually would. This is from 1968. Some people talk about something called cultural Marxism, the Frankfurt School, and you get in a lot of trouble if you talk about it. But what it was after World War II, we brought over a bunch of dissident left-wing communist intellectuals to the United States who came over, and specifically with Marcuse, he was teaching at Brandeis University in Boston, a very swanky place, actually. And these people who always say they were victims always end up having silver spoons. Funny how that works out. But he wrote a book talking about how tolerance was something that should only be extended in one direction. And I want to go ahead and read just a bit of this. It's a long essay. It's worth sharing. I'll share it with you so you can read it. But what they said was that they needed to take tolerance away from their enemies and only for the people who were speaking to the good. That is the universal socialist ideal, because otherwise people would get confused and it become a means of oppression. So tolerance itself only has value in service to a higher goal. And what is that? This idea that there's universal equality. Quote, withdrawal of tolerance from regressive movements before they can become active, intolerance toward thought, opinion, word, and finally intolerance in the opposite direction, that is toward the self-styled conservatives, to the political right. These anti-democratic notions respond to the actual development of democratic society, which has destroyed the basis for universal tolerance. So let me just parse what he said. He said, in order to have real democracy, you have to oppose democracy because some people use democracy the wrong way. And you can only have real democracy if the democracy that's out there has tolerance for all things at all costs and doesn't make any assertions of value. So what you see here is the origin of this is the destruction of all values. That literally there can be no belief but one belief, and that one belief must be sameness for all. It literally is the ideology of being a human slug. That's what they are promoting, and that's why they end up putting they turn men into either machines for the state or meat for the grinder. That's what happens every single time. And this is what Marcuse basically argues with a lot of big fancy words that ultimately ends up being the world's biggest circular fallacy. The conditions under which tolerance can again become a liberating and humanizing force are yet to still be created. When tolerance mainly serves the protection and preservation of a repressive society, when it serves to neutralize opposition and render men immune against other and better forms of life, then tolerance has been perverted. And when this perversion starts in the mind of the individual, in his consciousness, his needs, when heteronymous interest occupy him before he can experience his servitude, then the efforts to counteract his dehumanization must begin at the place of entrance, there where the false consciousness takes form. It must begin with stopping the words and images which feed this consciousness. To be sure, this is censorship, even pre-censorship, but openly directed against the more or less hidden censorship that permeates the free media. So what they're saying is that their idea of tolerance requires censorship, and when they say pre-censorship, they mean they don't even want you to be able to have the thought. Why are words destroyed? Why are statues taken down? Why do you see these efforts to go ahead and attack certain groups? Because you're not allowed to think the thought. Because you can't have true democracy if you think values are real. If you believe in anything, these people hate you. It's a bad spot to be in, isn't it? Where the false consciousness has become prevalent in the national and popular behavior, it translates itself almost immediately into practice. The safe distance between ideology and reality, repressive thought and repressive action, between the word of destruction and the deed destruction, is dangerously shortened. Thus, the breakthrough the false consciousness may provide the Archimedean point of view for larger emancipation at an infinitesimally small spot, to be sure, but it is on the enlargement of such small spots that the chance of change depends. So what are they saying? They're saying that if you are able to offer a counter thought to what they want, that they literally might see all their efforts undone. And they know that because reason will do that. Their program is unreasonable, is riddled with fallacies and truths that aren't even close to reality. And so what do? They shut you down before you can speak. I'm not going to normalize you by speaking to you, gave way to. I'm going to cancel your culture, get into the camp, you lose your job, you fascist. I was just going to church. I know it's bigotry against our LGBT brothers. This is where we're at. This is what we're fighting, and this is why this is a spiritual battle of morality. This is from 1968, man, Herbert Marcuse. This has been taught to our kids now for 50 years, and you think there's no consequence to this? And what were conservatives doing? Well, I was just looking out for my family. I was making money. Not good enough. Not good enough. We needed a new beginning. And even to this day, I could think just a few years ago, I knew people who were out in the streets protesting against this stuff. And the conservatives went ahead and said, well, we're for free speech, because they were taught these values as kids, and they shut down the very people opposing Antifa. So now you have a war against this thing where the far right has been neutered. The center right doesn't know what it's doing. The center left is delusional. And the far left has gone crazy. There is another side to the battle, of course. There is a neoliberal elite that understands this, that sees all of us as meat for the grinder to be out there, and they just see these Bolsheviks as the most efficient killers. And they'd love to have us be destroyed by them, and then they will destroy the others in turn, and then the world will be a happy place where it's a park where we won't have any of these awful people running around. These are the conflicts we have today, especially as technology comes in and we see nanotech technology like Antifa talks about years before this pandemic even, that was going to be a goal of theirs. Who do you think would make such manufactured software? Probably the very rich people that they decry, and maybe some of them are Antifa, but I bet most of them are not. And what they will end up doing is destroying as many people as needed. We're going into a decade of mass death. I don't know how else to say it, because these ideas are being fought upon, and that there's no one looking out for the welfare and interest of the people. Let's go for one more piece. I wanted to share one other thing that was in here that I think is really important. This was his postscript that he wrote in this, so that you have this. Under the conditions prevailing in this country, tolerance does not and cannot fulfill the civilizing function attributed it to by the liberal propagandist of democracy, namely the protection of dissent. The progressive historical force of tolerance lies in its extension to those modes and forms of dissent which are not committed to the status quo of society. So they're saying that which is normal is bad, just so you understand, and not confined to the institutional framework of the established society. Consequently, the idea of tolerance implies the necessity for the dissenting group of individuals to become illegitimate if and when the established legitimacy prevents and counteracts the development of dissent. This would be the case not only in a totalitarian society under dictatorship in one-party states, but also in a democracy, where the majority does not result from the development of independent thought and opinion, but rather from the monopolistic or oligopolistic, that's a small group leading, administration of public opinion, without terror and normally without censorship. In such cases, the majority is self-perpetuating while perpetuating the vested interest which made it a majority. let's stop there for 1 second. What they're saying is that if you believe what your parents believed and what your society's built upon for years, then you are the one who has to be targeted. Why? Because you are standing in the way of the changes they say are necessary. So I want you to know, not doing anything and just going along to get along, they hate you just as much. They hate you even more. And this is what we're dealing with here. In its very structure, this majority is closed, petrified. It repels a priori any change other than the changes within the system. But this means the majority is no longer justified in claiming the democratic title of the best guardian of the common interest. And such a majority is all but the opposite of Rousseau's general will. It is composed not of individuals who in their political functions have made effective abstraction from their private interests, but on the contrary, of individuals who have effectively identified their private interests with their political functions. And the representatives of this majority in ascertaining and executing its will, ascertain and execute the will of the vested interests which have formed the majority. The ideology of democracy hides its lack of substance. Okay. And he goes forward, and he talks about how monopoly actors use democracy, and that's true. I agree with that. But what he's ultimately saying here is the idea that they're attacking is that the majority who is happy and content, that is not looking out for the interest of minorities elsewhere, is one to be attacked, because ultimately, if anyone is unhappy, everyone must be unhappy. And think of what that means for a society, okay, just for a moment. If you literally have to be distraught because of every injustice that happens in the world, will you ever be happy? Will you ever succeed? Will you ever have peace? Will you ever have tranquility? Will you ever have a society? Well, they've tried that, and the answer turns out to be no, because ultimately what happens is an inversion where the protected class becomes the privileged class. And as we saw in the Soviet Union, we had the dictatorship of the proletariat, or the Politburo that exists in China today. You have these different entities that form that they seem to be the heirs of the people that enjoy the comforts. And whether it be Mao Zedong or a party functionary, you ultimately end up in the same place. And so this is the ideology that we face in the streets. And the danger that's out there is that this sort of leadership may, in the fullness of time, go ahead and destroy as many people as it can. And no one is stopping this. The federal government won't, right? The state governments are enabling this because these are their voters and they understand. And no one is standing up against this because the law enforcement itself, repressive tolerance. We've seen the FBI go out there and they've arrested people, as I shared with you in the previous episode, who they knew were not responsible for things and let the people who were responsible get away. So real justice, that is holding people to account for their actual actions under a commonly agreed upon and publicly known law, has been subverted for this idea that some people are beyond reproach. That, my friends, is what tyranny looks like. And the tyranny of the mob, which is what democracy always enables, is why the Atlantic nation actually practices what essentially comes down to constitutional monarchy. Because you end up having the mob be set against itself by people who cynically, in control of media, finance, and also psychological intimidation, are setting them against us. So why are they in the streets destroying things? One, because they want to erase our history, because they want to tell a different story. Two, because they want you afraid. They want you psychologically intimidated, and they want you to think you cannot stand against these people. And their clients who they get in there, who serve in these cities, in these left-wing sinisters in a lot of ways, go ahead and enable that. But three, they're doing it fundamentally because they want to destroy this society, they want to destroy this world, and they want to remake it in accordance with their religion of man, and this idea that equality is the true religion, that we will all have material status, and that we will all have chips where we will ultimately be compelled to become one. They want to become a collective. They want to be a hive. They want the end of all individuality in the end. They don't want that. Because think about it. Have they ever talked one time about a thought of an individual other than a pejorative, that is to say, negative sense? No. They don't want you reasoning. They don't want you in nature. They don't want you living in a rural area. They don't want you going to church. They don't want you considering other opinions. They want you scared and pliant. They want you working and giving over to them. And they have even said they're going to go ahead and take all you own. And it's not just about private property. It's about the ability to be a sovereign individual. And so what do we do in opposition to this in the Atlantic nation? We present the idea that we are a nation of sovereign individuals, of sovereign states, where we give power over to localities. We give a lot more rights to the individual. You know, we support liberty, but we expect responsibilities. So stuff like this happens. And it's why one of the things that's fomented into the Constitution, the Bill of Rights that I wrote for this, was that we were going to allow school choice so that something like this could never happen again, where a kid kids are taught to hate ourselves so terribly as this. We're going to go ahead and give power over to counties at a higher level where they're actually going to control the way money works, and then we'll have a system that prevents sort of problems. So you vote locally for who's good for you, but we're never going to allow something like this to happen again, and we are going to see the restoration of our values, the understanding that families are something to be sustained, and that we don't want atomized individuals picked off by the state, but that we understand the core of human society and that which builds upwards is building upwards from that family basis, primarily men and women coming together to raise their children in a loving, caring, voluntary, supportive relationship, and then from that families build communities and clans and tribes and neighborhoods and nations, and ultimately get to the point where we are invested in one another instead of trying to compel one another with these intermediaries of force. They have to make you hate each other so that you have to give them power. And they're doing a very good job. How much has the hate grown? But we can walk away from this. This is what the Atlantic Nation is all about, bringing people together who don't necessarily agree. And if you have specific issues about an issue, let's talk about it. Fine. We can describe it. We can use reason to solve problems. That's what we could do, but they don't let you do that. You're not allowed to have that conversation. Why? Because they don't want to solve the problems. Don't you see? They find new problems every time a problem even tries to get solved. And this is what a lot of people miss. They're like, if we just go ahead and give them, it's not about what you give them. It's that they're making you destroy your own credibility by going ahead and endorsing all of their views. And no one supports you. It's like the church that goes out there and goes ahead and teaches the gospel of love instead of the gospel of Jesus. And it sits there either half empty or full of people who don't understand why they're there. If you give up the reasoning by which you do things, the ends don't justify the means. And this is one of the fights we need to get back into, knowing why we're doing things, the means behind them, and being able to reason and understand those things according to nature, including human nature and the nature of truth itself, which is a search we all must undergo. And if we do that with a little bit of grace and a lot less cynicism and evil, we don't end up in the world these people want. Because the world of totalitarian control, where your thoughts are constrained and you basically are used as a thinking unit, as part of a collective thing, we are facing the threat of that system from two different directions. And whether it be from the radical utopian view that we're going to enact socialism, or neoliberal cynicism that we're going to talk about, where we'll be corporate drones, where you get zapped if you don't give enough of your brain power over. This is no way for people to live. This is a soulless future that is devoid of God, that is utterly evil, and that is the destruction of the human spirit. And I'll fight it. I'll die for it. I'm fine with that. And I'm going to go out there in the field and lead those efforts. But that's what the heart of the Atlantic Nation is about, reminding people, as my brother Kanaz said, that, there is a sacred space that is different from that, where we strive to be better. And that there is, even though we have many faults for which we should repent and for which we should seek grace and forgiveness, which are gifts that are given to us, thank the Lord, that we would stand up against this and say, no, you're not going to do this. You're not going to beat us up. And if it comes to a force of arms, then so be it. There's nothing you can do beyond that. But right now, this is the time to bring our brothers and sisters together and recognize that regardless of where we came from, that we can stand up better against this, and that we can honor our lands and live peacefully and have a good life. Because as I asked in the very first episode of the show, what is the good? It isn't this. Let me share some good news with you, though, a little bit, because I always like to leave on a happy note. This is from the second book of the second letter to the Philippians, I should say. Christ's example of humility. This is segment 2. So if there's any encouragement in Christ, any comfort from love, any participation in the Spirit, any affection and sympathy, complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant to yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of the others. Have this mind among yourself, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is the Lord, to the glory of God the Father. And I do bow to that. But I share this piece not just for the commentary, of course, about service to the Lord, which I highly recommend to all, but I share this piece because it talks about equality, and it talks about service, and it talks about this idea that you don't just serve your ends at all times like Antifa does, or like the neoliberals do. I mean, these people who are obsessed with either the state or with the market all have this commonality where it's mutual interest, maximal concern, all these things. And it's not about service. It's not about a nation. It's not about any real human regard for one another. We are not our brother's keepers in their world. We are our brother's oppressors in one's, and we are our brother's exploiters in the other. And I don't want to exploit you. I'm telling you everything I think. The weapon I have, that this movement has, this nation has, is truth. We tell you what we think, we tell you what we're doing, and we count on you to use your capacity. We require you to be better so that our world can survive and this can be a better place. And that's what the Lord requires of each and every one of us. That is the mission to which we are sent and the purpose to which we are born. And every man and every woman can be a part of that mission. It's a tremendous thing. And we can do that in how we live our daily lives, where our testimony comes from the fact that we try to better ourselves and better those around us, not where we seek to say, you are evil. I don't presume either people are originally evil, and I don't presume people are there to be exploited. I don't do that. Because I know we can save people and we can help people. And if you are someone, for the people who listen to this show of a leftist bent, you tell me which sounds like the better way to reach people and to achieve progress. To treat people as human beings and to go ahead and seek them as individuals as better and to build them up on the once liberal foundation you saw, or to take this sort of weird Orwellian term of progression where you go ahead and sit one group against the other ad infinitum. I don't believe in that. And I think we need to be able to work together on this. And will there be people outside who look differently? Yeah. Am I trying to solve the world for everyone? No, it's beyond me. It's beyond any of us. But it's not beyond us to go ahead and reach out to those we can and make them understand. And if I can reach a few people with this, then the Atlantic nation may become a real thing. And there's a reason a lot more people are flying the pines in line. So as we go through with this, I want to share with you a closing prayer. Heavenly Father, we pray that those who have been misled by evil and deception, that they be awakened to the light of truth that you can offer them, and that these kids who seek their own destruction and the destruction of so many others, the loss of so many souls of talent, and who lead communities astray in thinking that their victimhood will somehow be absolved by oppressing others, we pray that you bring them to a greater wisdom and to understand that it is in service to others that we find our redemption, and it's the connection that we learned through our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, that when we come together as a common nation in support of one another, that we can then begin to reforge our bonds and build ourselves a society of peace and prosperity and plenty, and that hopefully in service to you, that you will permit those of us who have undertaken this mighty task to overcome the tremendous odds. And I pray for the safety of all in this audience and against the many slings that will come against them from the forces of evil that motivate our opponents. Because we know the enemy has ever been the voice of discord, and that as we go forth in concord, we pray that you look out for each and every one of us, and that we honor you through our service in this effort to make a world more suitable for you. In Jesus' name, amen. So, that's today's episode. I will be back Monday. Tonight, I will be on YouTube at 7 p.m. Please listen to the show. Always a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much. For all the people throughout the Atlantic nation, throughout the greater Northeast, and throughout North America, in the United States, Canada, and around the world, thank you very much for listening. Continue the fight. We will not give up. We are going to win this thing because we are right and we are good. And it's not because we want to oppress others, but rather because we want to develop ourselves. God bless each and every one of you. Have a good day.